identify the historical burial grounds at Old Howard Street Burial Ground and Brigham Street Burial Ground.
Motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Campbell will make his presentation.
Thank you again. And thank you all for coming back for another night of fun. I very much appreciate it. It's nice to talk to people that are mostly awake. Tonight we're going to talk about the FY 2015 recommendations by the Community Preservation Committee to allocate the CPA revenue for 2015 as well as some of our reserves. Just to note that to date we have received a state match of $1.6 million on our own revenues, and that's about a 55% yearly average. We got a nice bump this past year, so it gives us more to work with. Just in review, by law, we must allocate at least 10% of our yearly revenues to open space preservation projects, affordable housing creation or preservation, and 10% towards historical preservation. The remaining 70% can be used on any one of those core areas or on a fourth category called recreational projects. We're going to talk about several of those tonight because a recent change in the legislation allows us to use CPA funds to upgrade existing recreational facilities in town, basketball courts, baseball fields, etc., as opposed to just those we created with CPA, which is the way the law was written originally. So now on to Article 48. Show of hands, how many people have actually walked the old Howard Street Cemetery? Very good. How many have walked the old Brigham Street Cemetery? I'm guilty there as well. I've never been to that one. But if you've ever walked either, you'll see it's an excellent historic resource. There's very interesting information in there. The problem is right now they're in pretty deplorable condition. This picture was taken just this week. You see many headstones are about to fall over, if not already fallen over. This is an example of the type of ID sign that would be put up. This one was purchased with last year's CPA allocation at a town meeting. If you haven't seen this one, it's at the Wachusett Aqueduct. And it's this kind of quality that we'd be getting in an ID sign. So really what we're looking at here is the Historical Commission's goal is to help educate Northborough residents, give them an opportunity to learn more about the great resources we have in town. So what you're voting on is $5,000 to the Historic Commission for the costs of design and build of 2 long-lasting signs.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on Article 48 from the floor?
Thank you, Bill.
No, but she'll catch up with you. Just give her a second or two.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
All right, I want everybody in. It's on now? All right, thank you. Ooh. I had more of a general question. I thought you were going to get into some generalities before you get into that. So, Mr. Moderator, can I ask a general question about the CPA?
Certainly you may.
All right. I just went through the articles that are on the warrant for tonight, and we're talking about moving around $859,100, which means that the CPA fund and its reserves, which you have several reserve funds, have a lot of money in them. I wonder if you could tell us how much money is in all these funds, where is the money, and how is it controlled and monitored? Thank you.
I can do all of that, if you'll bear with me. First of all, you're correct that the total amount of articles do not equal the expected 2015 revenue. But this slide, I know it's small print, but this is the current balances in all of our reserves as put out by the town financial manager. And in case you can't see it, I'll read to you. The first column at the bottom, open space reserve, is only $813 right now. Primarily that's because we spent the majority of the reserves on a large Green Street land acquisition a few years back. The affordable housing reserve is $32,813. That too is a fairly low number. Most of that reserve money went toward Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation projects, one of which is the senior housing condominiums you're going to hear about later that are finally complete. The third column is historic reserve, and that is $454,000. There's an article tonight that requests that we add a little more to it. We spoke about that last night in particular as a resource for the town to acquire a property they might consider to be value enough to own, or to put a historic restriction on, or in some other way to preserve that property, save it from demolition or from a change of its use. Finally, there's the last column called the unreserved fund balance. It's now at $599. Some of the articles tonight will reference using funds from that balance. Into this balance goes any unspended or unallocated funds beyond the minimum 10% that I mentioned earlier. And lately, the committee has taken a somewhat conservative approach to put more balances, more unused funds into the unreserved balance, so that it gives us flexibility in a given year. Should there be a project that comes up that demands more than would be in one of the current reserve balances, we're able to move that at town meeting. Whereas once it's placed in the open space reserve balance, for example, it must be used on that type of project. So tonight, we're going to, some of the articles will look at using the current year revenues or some of the reserves such that we at least meet the 10% minimums, and then, of course, so we don't exceed what's currently here. Did that help? Any more questions?
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing no questions, I'd like to have a recommendation from the Appropriations Committee, please.
Mr. Moderator, the Appropriations Committee recommends approval of this article.
And may I also hear from the Financial Planning Committee, please?
Mr. Moderator, this article is only for, I believe, a $5,000 dollar amount. Financial Planning only recommends on articles that are of a capital nature and meet our definition of a capital project, which is a minimum of $25,000. So Financial Planning does not have a recommendation on this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 48. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $5,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Historical Commission for the purchase of 2 signs to identify the historical burial grounds at Old Howard Street Burial Ground and Brigham Street Burial Ground. This requires a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 48 passes. Article 49, please. Mr. Campbell.
I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $52,500 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $25,500 from the Community Preservation Historic Resources Reserve account for a total of $78,000. I need to start over, I spoke wrong. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $52,500 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $25,500 from the Community Preservation Historic Resources Reserve for a total of $78,000 to the Northborough Historic Commission for headstone and footstone restoration at the Howard Street Cemetery.
Motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Campbell, your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. So these two articles, 48 and 49, go together. They're part of a multi-phase approach by the Historic Commission to restore our cemeteries. It's an excellent project. This is actually phase 2 of the headstone restoration. Phase 1 last year helped identify what needed to be done, bid process, and also some of the initial restoration. This photo here is of Howard Street Cemetery currently, the old section. This one here is of the Brigham Street burial ground in its previous state. And now here's an example of some of the restoration that was done. Headstones were straightened, headstones were secured, area cleaned up around, and then most importantly, the faces of the gravestones can be completely restored. It's unbelievable what kind of graphic you can bring out of it. You can read all of the text from Elizabeth Wheeler's grave here. You can also see some of the early detail that was done in these headstones. So really an enjoyable thing to look at after the restoration is done. So this project would cover all of the gravestones at Howard Street Cemetery to put them in a similar condition, at least wherever possible.
Thank you. Any questions, any concerns on Article 49? Yes, sir.
Kevin Carroll, 45 Osier Ave. I stand in support of this article. If you ever had time to walk up to Howard Street, you see the beautiful artwork that was done in these stones in the 1700s. The other fun thing is you get to see all these names, which we know as streets, but in the cemetery you meet as people. It is a wonderful resource, and I support you for this effort to restore and maintain the historic cemetery.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, may I hear from the Appropriations Committee on Article 49, please?
Mr. Moderator, the Appropriations Committee recommends approval of this article.
And may I hear from Financial Planning on Article 49?
Mr. Moderator, Financial Planning also recommends approval.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 49. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $52,500 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $25,500 from the Community Preservation Historic Resource Reserve for a total of $78,000 to the Northborough Historical Commission for headstone and footstone restoration at the Howard Street Cemetery. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? Article 49 passes. Article 50, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $75,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and place said amount in the Community Preservation Historic Resources Reserve Fund for the purpose of future historical property preservation and acquisition.
Motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Campbell, when you're ready.
Thank you again, Mr. Moderator. So this article, as we mentioned earlier, is adding to the historic resource savings account, so to speak. And the Historical Commission has responsibly every year come to ask for a small amount to build up that balance. And again, it's there in the event that they do identify a property that needs either restoring or acquisition. As of now, there are several targets, but it's one of those things where you have to be in a position to act and also be able to leverage the possibility of a state matching grant, perhaps a 50% matching grant, somewhat similar to what we've done with open space acquisition. So again, we would appreciate your support of this article.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor on Article 50? Hearing no questions, may I have a recommendation from Appropriations Committee, please?
Mr. Moderator, Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 50. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $75,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and place said amount in the Community Preservation Historic Resource Reserve Fund for the purpose of future historical property preservation or acquisition. This also is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. Those opposed? Article 50 passes. Article 51, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $50,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $50,000 from the Community Preservation Unreserved Fund for a total of $100,000 to the Northborough Department of Public Works for costs associated with the renovation of the observation platform, including but not limited to the addition of a handicapped access ramp at Memorial Field, 0 East Main, Assessor's Map 53, Parcel 106.
Second. Motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you again. Well, this would look familiar if you were at town meeting last year. We brought up the project for the Memorial Field platform renovation. This is one of several photos I'll show you again of the current condition. Many of us have leaned on this, wondering if it was going to fall over. If you're trying to walk into it and you have any disability whatsoever that would make walking difficult, you're going to have a hard time getting on it. So it's just not a safe thing for the future. It's been there for God knows how long, and we're all very much in favor of the project. Last year, we asked you for phase one, which was $15,000 for design, engineering, bid preparation, and so on. We've spent a portion of that money. The additional funds will go either back in the reserve or toward the project. Now we're looking for $100,000 or hopefully less if once the bids are submitted. We're hoping we can get it done for less than that. We believe this is a conservative amount, but it will completely renovate the platform into a more permanent structure, provide safety guardrails around, and also provide handicap parking and access. Now, our senior members, American League members, baseball fans of all ages can attend and watch safely at Memorial Field. So I hope you'll support the program. I think it's one of the excellent and more visible things that we can do in CPA.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the floor? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ann St. John, Main Street. I didn't come last year, so I don't understand this. I don't understand why this is not coming out of the Parks and Recreation or other departments as a capital if this is deemed so necessary. Why is this being transferred from community preservations for the Memorial Field? I don't understand why that costs $100,000 either, and why that's critical for, I mean, there's the fields all around it. People sit all over it. I never stepped foot on that in all the years I was there. I'm not sure why $100,000 is necessary for this.
I understand. Can I address
Anyone?
question one
Okay.
first, which I think was why is it coming out of CPA revenue?
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons the town voted for the CPA in the first place was that by getting state matching funds, we can pay less for these kinds of projects out of pocket. So as you saw earlier, we're getting about 55% on average year-over-year match from state money. Then, if a project qualifies under CPA, and we can do it with those funds, we save by not taking it out of the budget in some other way. So this doesn't increase any tax burden. It doesn't affect the town's budget. So it's a good thing there. Yeah. Secondly, as far as whether or not you've been on it, I know that dozens of others have.
That wasn't appropriate, really, to say
okay,
that.
I
but
understand.
I mean,
you're right. People sit on the lawn. It would be great if we could build bleachers all around. But the
Right.
fact of the matter is, many people do hang out here. Children play and move in and out because the snack bar is right next to it.
Yeah.
So it's been a safety issue for a long time. And last part, why does it cost $100,000? You know what? I'm not sure. I don't think it needs to cost that much. The preliminary engineering estimates indicate that it could cost that much. We're hoping to negotiate and get it significantly down. But I will tell you, it looks easy on the surface. Hey, you got to build a deck. But in fact, you've got to make it structurally sound. You have to do a site plan and survey. You've got to make sure that, that you have appropriate footings and so on. You can't build it like the deck in your backyard. And hopefully it's better than my deck in my backyard. But in the end, you want something that's very sturdy and is going to last another 50 to 100 years. Then the handicap parking and access part of it is really an add-on that we think makes this project even more worthwhile.
Where is that going to be?
This is as you, if you've ever come down, what is that, East Main?
East Main.
And the ball fields are on either side. There's a tiny little driveway into the shed for the, the work shed there. And there's really no parking. You're not supposed to park there anyway, even though people
Right,
like
you're
me
not.
did.
So that's
But,
where they're going to put handicap?
Yeah, so we're going to open it up. There'll be at least one place to park, place to wheel in a wheelchair, and make it a much more accessible area. So that's a part of it that makes it more than even what I perceived originally, but we do hope we can come in under budget on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Any comments? If you could go to the mic, please.
Deborah Como, Howard Street.
You broke it.
I just wanted to make people aware that when we bid, I'm on the Historical Commission and the CPC, when we bid these projects out, it's not like we can ask anybody to come in and do it. We have to have specific writers to do the proposals. We also have to pay prevailing wages, which are much higher than the wages around here. So 100,000 does look like a lot, but it could almost cost that much. Okay? So, I mean, we're restricted in what we can do with the money because it's town-owned property. So I just wanted people to understand that. Thank you.
Again, just to reiterate the good news, it doesn't add to the town's budget, doesn't increase your taxes at all. The actual cost is lowered by the state match that we get. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Robert Rooks, 46 Wilson Road, Northborough. I'm curious as to how many handicap spots that you would put in to this project?
Parking spots or sitting spots?
Handicap parking spots.
I think there's potentially room for 2. It's not been finalized. I don't know if we can get more in that particular area.
2.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, any other comments? Hearing none, may I hear from Appropriations on Article 51, please?
Mr. Moderator, we recommend approval of this article.
And may I hear from Financial Planning on 51?
Mr. Moderator, Financial Planning also recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 51. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $50,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $50,000 from the Community Preservation Unreserved Fund for a total of $100,000 to the Northborough Department of Public Works for costs associated with the renovation of the observation platform, including but not limited to the addition of a handicap ramp at Memorial Field, 0 East Main, Assessors Map 53, Parcel 106. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? Article 51 passes.
Thank you.
Article 52, please. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you again, Mr. Moderator. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $110,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Youth Basketball Association for costs associated with the repair and update of the basketball courts at one or more of the following schools: the Peasley Elementary School, Z Elementary School, Proctor Elementary School, and Milliken Middle School.
Second. Motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Campbell, when you're ready.
Thanks again. So this project is another one in the recreation category. As I mentioned earlier, because the state updated the legislation a couple of years ago, we now can take advantage of the state-matched CPA funds to renovate our existing outdoor facilities, basketball courts, tennis courts, playing fields, and so on. So it really gives us an excellent opportunity to make these facilities more usable. The goal here is to make the courts safe and more appealing to the youth to play. They're used extensively in the summer programs, both for the Northborough Youth Basketball and the recreation programs that our excellent director runs here in town. All the courts have various levels of repair that are needed. This one's from Proctor School. There's a basket missing, actually, you see there. Many of the hoops and backboards are cracked. We plan to reuse the poles wherever possible because the pole is a very firm structure. If it can be reset, we'll do that to save cost. Here's another view where you see the pavement very well cracked. Many of them are unlevel, so you get puddles. Makes it very hard to use in the first place, makes it unsafe. Here's a hoop at the Z Elementary School. That's about 10'6", so it's a little hard to play on. Not sure why the NBA doesn't raise their hoops, but the elementary school shouldn't. This is the goal. This is one court that already has been refurbished by the Northborough Basketball Association. This is at middle school, one of the 4 that are there. And you'll notice the court surface is very clean, well painted. It also has a seal on it that makes it much safer because if you fall, you don't scrape your knee quite as much as on the really rough pavement. All the cracks are filled in. The backboards have been reinforced. The hoops are so-called bison style, which you can really lean on. Even the kids that could dunk on it, they're very hard to break. So these are the goals. We don't know whether the budget will carry us through all the elementary school courts. And if the Lincoln Street project should get voted in, I very much hope so, then that's one that will be delayed because they're going to tear up all around it anyway. We'll wait till the courts are more settled there. But in the meantime, the more damaged ones at Proctor and middle school we can proceed with. So once again, an excellent resource we can enhance for the youth and anybody else that likes to play basketball, and we can do it with state-matched CPA funds.
Any questions or comments on Article 52? Hearing none, I would like a recommendation from Appropriations on Article 52.
Mr. Moderator, Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
And from Financial Planning on 52.
Mr. Moderator, Financial Planning also recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 52. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $110,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Youth Basketball Association for costs associated with repair and update of the basketball courts at one or more of the following schools: the Peasley Elementary School, Z Elementary School, Proctor Elementary School, and Melican Middle School. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 52 passes.
Thank you very much.
Article 53, please.
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $52,500 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund.
The motion has been made and seconded. Once again, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I wanted to use the presentation of this article to point out and highlight that the 4 senior affordable housing condos on Center Drive are now complete. This is a photograph taken just recently of the outside. Another one here. All 4 units were funded with CPA money, again, state-matched CPA money, that we had granted to the Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation over 4 previous town meetings. Actually, the project looks like it will come in under the amount that we allocated. We had allocated up to about $700,000. Right now, it's running well under that budget, and these are complete on schedule. They're ready to be occupied next month. A lottery's been held recently for the available units. And I wanted to take an opportunity right now to thank the Northborough Affordable Housing Corp. For their effort, and in particular, the tireless work by Mr. Rick Leaf in getting this done. So thank you very much, Rick. So the article is to restore part of the reserve fund, which, as you saw earlier, was quite low. This amount will go into the reserve, and we hope to build that back up in coming years, possibly contribute to another Northborough Affordable Housing Corp. Project or any other project that would enhance the availability of affordable housing in Northborough.
Thank you. Any questions? Any statements on Article 53? Hearing none, may I hear from Appropriations on Article 53, please?
Mr. Moderator, Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 53. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $52,500 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. This also is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 53 passes.
Thank you.
Article 54, Mr. Campbell.
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $91,400 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $308,600 from the Community Preservation Unreserved Fund for a total of $400,000 and place said amount in the Conservation Commission Fund for the purpose of future open space preservation or acquisitions, and further, if such funds are used for the acquisition of real property, to authorize the Conservation Commission to grant a conservation restriction in said property, meeting the requirements of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 184, to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or to a charitable corporation or foundation selected by the Conservation Commission with the right to enforce the restriction.
The motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Campbell, when you're ready.
Thank you once again. So I dug up this old slide from the past when you may remember my pitching to the town to support open space in the first place. And I think we've been lucky in Northborough. We're getting more crowded. There's more traffic lights now than ever. it won't get any better, but I think we've been lucky that our development projects have been done responsibly. And it's important to remember that every time we invest in open space, we preserve our own property values by preserving the community that we live in, not to mention the other options that it gives us in preserving the wildlife corridors and recreational opportunities that are in town. And I'd like to go a little off script here if the moderator will indulge me for a moment.
Okay.
I've been in Northborough 19 years. I know that makes me a teenager still compared to many of you, but nonetheless, I've been to most every town meeting, and every time I'm raising my card and we're voting for another capital expenditure, I have to confess, I think to myself, God, this town votes for everything of a capital nature. And that's the point, though. We vote for it because we can. We can have good schools in town. We can have a great senior center. We can have a great library. We can have an excellent police department and fire department. We can have the resources that they need to keep us safe. We can have the equipment and the technology to support our infrastructure. And we can afford to invest in open space, thanks in part to the Community Preservation Fund and the state matching funds. So I just think all of this is what community preservation is about. And the fact that we can pull off all these things and at the same time have a tax rate that increased the lowest of 52 area communities over the last 10 years between Worcester and Boston. I think that's remarkable. It's a tribute to our great town managers, and the CPA is just one part that makes this town a better place to live. So I hope with that, you'll support our effort to put this money into the Conservation Fund. It's consistent with what we've done the last several town meetings. We have used the Conservation Fund very effectively to help acquire or provide conservation restrictions on various parcels. It allows the Conservation Commission to move quickly and take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself. So we're kind of looking to replenish that amount back, and we have some opportunities in the coming year, I hope, where we'll be adding to the preserved land in those areas, primarily in the northwest of town, where we have open farmland, many walking trails, and already have a lot of conservation land, such as on Mount Pisgah. So again, I appreciate your support of the article.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on Article 54, please?
Yes, Doug Stone again. I just wondered if you could clarify what you said, that it allows the Conservation Commission to act quickly. Like, what do you mean specifically? Without the town meeting, or?
Yes, this article and ones the town has approved previously move the money from the CPA reserve or revenues into the Conservation Fund. The Conservation Fund existed before the CPA was enacted in Northborough in 2004. And so it's been used before that and has been used since. So once it's in, now the money can be approved by the Conservation Fund with the help of the Open Space Committee to go toward programs that we see available. Acquiring a parcel, contributing, such as in the case of the New England forestry land. The town added $70,000, to which the state added over $400,000 and allowed us to preserve a parcel there off Ball Street. So it's those kinds of things. What I mean by acting quickly is that the opportunity wouldn't present itself if it had to be, delayed for a year's time.
So last night you had talked about with the historical properties, and you used that on the wording on the slide tonight, that it would allow quick action. So does that mean that we still have to have a town meeting to vote on these parcels that come up, correct?
The correct answer is, when it comes to historic preservation programs and to allocate any money from the CPA reserve, we must come back to town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
For this article, again consistent with one we did previously, if we agree to place the money in the Conservation Fund, then it's available for the Conservation Commission to make a judgment on outside of town meeting.
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't include historical properties?
No, this is only for open space preservation.
Uh-huh.
And I must add that any action taken on a property with the funds placed from the CPA must meet the guidelines of the CPA legislation. Primarily that means it must be open land preservation or go towards the rehabilitation of open space. There was a Bartlett Pond restoration article last year, for instance, okay? And if there is land acquired with CPA funds, it must have a permanent conservation restriction on it. That means it can never be used for any other purpose. It can never be developed. It must stay in a recreation or open space state.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments on Article 54? Hearing none, may I please have a recommendation from the Appropriations Committee?
Mr. Moderator, Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
And may I also hear from Financial Planning, please?
Mr. Moderator, Financial Planning recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 54. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $91,400 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues and the sum of $308,600 from the Community Preservation Unreserved Fund for a total of $400,000 and place said amount in the Conservation Commission Fund for the purpose of future open space preservation or acquisitions. And further, if such funds are used for the acquisition of real property, to authorize the Conservation Committee to grant a conservation restriction in said property, meeting the requirements of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 184, to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or to a charitable corporation or foundation selected by the Conservation Commission with a right to enforce the restriction. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 54 passes.
Thank you.
Article 56. Once again, Mr. Campbell. 55.
55.
Freudian slip.
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $15,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Trails Committee, a subcommittee of the Northborough Open Space Committee, for construction materials for the creation of new trails, a parking area on Davis Street for the Brook Trail, and repair of existing trails.
Do I have a second?
Thank you, Bill.
Do I have a second? Second. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Okay, so we have an opportunity for a neat project here. The slide overhead shows a picture taken from Google Maps, so it may not be completely up to date, but there is an opportunity to create a trail and a new recreation area in the so-called Brook area along the flood control dam that's parallel to Route 20. So many people have driven by it. There used to be kind of a trash area. There were signs that said no trespassing. The DCR helped come in and clean that up. That's now gone, and they have blessed this project moving forward if the town approves it. Where you see the arrow pointing is where we'd be clearing out trees and putting up a small parking area, and that would give access into a trail that would go along the dam and has the potential to join with other trails that are in this area. It's relatively unused now. This is an example of what that parking area might look like. This was just created at the Green Street land that the town agreed to acquire a few years back, and we've recently, the Trails Committee has recently created some trails network there. Because the area is off of busy Route 20 as well as a busy David Street intersection, there really isn't a place to put any parking along Route 20. This, where the arrow points, is a lot of about 6 acres. That's actually, I'm sorry, 3 acres. 3 acres, I think it is. That's actually still owned and controlled by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So they've agreed to allow it to be used for this purpose, and also the rest of the land is also owned by them. So again, this article would approve $15,000 for the land clearing, parking lot creation, and the necessary materials for construction of the trails.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the floor on Article 55? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ellen Church, 339 Crawford Street. When you were on Route 20, it looks like there's a big boulder there that used to have a sign, like a historical marker. What is that?
I think that marker is from the Corps of Engineers when they put the earthen dam in originally.
Oh, okay.
There's
I always wondered what it was.
Yeah. I can't recite it back to you, but I think that's what it is. You may now go out and see the boulder if you pass this.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, may I please hear from the Appropriations Committee on Article 55?
Mr. Moderator, appropriations, I have a problem with that word tonight. Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 55. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $15,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Trails Committee, a subcommittee of the Northborough Open Space Committee, for construction materials for the creation of new trails, a parking area on Davis Street for the Brook Trail, and repair of existing trails. This is a majority vote. All of those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? Article 55 passes.
Thank you.
Now it's Article 56.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $48,600 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Community Preservation Committee for debt service and expenses associated with the open space land acquisition for the fiscal year 2015.
Second. Motion has been made and seconded.
Thanks, Bill.
Mr. Campbell.
Okay, this is actually a bit of housekeeping. It is authorization for a bond that was approved at town meeting to pay for the balance of funds that we used to acquire the Green Street property. At the time, there was not enough in the reserve accounts. We chose to so-called borrow against the CPA funds. So this bond is paid for each year with some of the CPA revenue that we get, not any new borrowing. And this is just one of the payments. I think we have 2 left after this, or 3 left after this one, and it'll be funded complete. So some might ask, well, why didn't you just, why don't you pay for it all at once? And that is an approach we could take, but the bond rate, to be honest with you, it's so low that it makes sense in this case just to continue the plan that we had. That way we're able to put more into the reserve. And again, this will be through in 3 more payments.
Any questions, comments on Article 56? Hearing none, may I hear from Appropriations on Article 56, please?
Mr. Moderator, Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
And may I hear from the Financial Planning Committee on Article 56?
Mr. Moderator, Financial Planning also recommends approval.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 56. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $48,600 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Community Preservation Committee for debt service and expenses associated with the open space land acquisition for the fiscal year 2015. This is also a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? Article 56 passes.
Thank you.
Article 57, once again, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $25,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Community Preservation Committee for expenses associated with the implementation of the Community Preservation Act, including but not limited to clerical assistance, office supplies, property surveys, appraisals, attorney's fees, and other professional services, recording fees, printing, and all other necessary and proper expenses for the fiscal year 2015. Thank you. One more housekeeping article, if you will. Each year, the CPA law allows for 5% of the revenues to be placed into what's called an administrative account. We utilize that if necessary for things like land appraisals and legal fees when we're in the process of acquiring a property, as an example. Anything that's unused goes back into that unreserved fund balance that you saw in the beginning of the presentation. So thank you very much, and I hope that you'll approve the article.
Any questions, any comments on Article 57? Yes.
Mr. Moderator, I'm Jane Walsh. I live at 26 Assabet Hill Circle, and it is with much appreciation that I will enthusiastically support this warrant article. I am so impressed and grateful with the work that Mr. Campbell has done these past several years, initially helping to bring the Community Preservation Act to our community. And I am appreciating the work of the other members on the Community Preservation Committee who create the opportunity for us to have such warrant articles before us as we've seen this year. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Any other comments on Article 57? Hearing none, may I hear from the Appropriations Committee on Article 57, please?
Mr. Moderator, Appropriations recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 57. I move the town vote to appropriate the sum of $25,000 from the Community Preservation Fund revenues to the Northborough Community Preservation Committee for expenses associated with the implementation of the Community Preservation Act, including but not limited to clerical assistance, office supplies, property surveys, appraisals, attorney's fees, and other professional services, recording fees, printing, and all other necessary and proper expenses for the fiscal year 2015. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 57 passes.
Thank you all very much for your attention. Any other questions on CPA, please reach out to us through the town planner's office. And a reminder that applications for next year are due in August. Thanks again.
We close the... Thank you. Okay. Article 58. Selectman Hutchins, please.
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to amend the Northborough Town Code, Part 3, Public Safety, by adding a new Chapter 3-52, Discharge of Firearms, as set forth in the warrant, but with the following additional sentence. This chapter shall not apply to the discharge of blank cartridges for ceremonial or military honors by a color guard or organization of war veterans in accordance with Section 39 of Chapter 148 of the General Laws.
Motion has been made and seconded. Presentation will be made by our Police Chief, Mr. Mark Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Article number 58, the roots of it were born in an unresolved conflict between neighbors in the west end of our community. Back in early November of 2010, the police department received a communication from a Settlers Road resident who was concerned about his neighbor's firing range and the proximity of the firing range to his own property line. I asked at that time our lieutenant, Bill Liver, to go up and take a look and assess the property, and he did report back to me that the firing range was located in fairly close proximity to homes on Settlers Road, and that it was less than 500 feet from occupied dwellings. My opinion at the time was that, and I'll get into this a little bit more deeply in a few minutes, this was, based on the description that we had, not what I considered to be a firing range. And I did not believe that the exemption in Chapter 269, Section 12E was applicable. I wrote a letter to the property owner, who I understand you will hear from shortly, Mr. David Brown and his wife, Carmel Safarian. And the letter did explain that the use of the range had to cease. And it spelled out what the penalties were for violating Chapter 269, Section 12E. About the 1st of December of 2010, I received correspondence from Mr. Brown. He chronicled the entire history of the firing range and explained to me in the letter how he and his wife had sought a piece of property upon which they could erect a firing range, as they were both avid competitive shooters. He explained to me that he had explored at that time, and if I'm correct, I'm thinking we're about 1994, from the town as to whether it would be permissible. And based on life at that time, he was informed that it would be. There were adjacent plots of land, which becomes a central theme in this unresolved debate. And Mr. Brown's exploration of that uncovered information that that land was not suitable for building and would probably not be developed. So the range was constructed and operated for a number of years very quietly and uneventfully. In the early 2000s, in the early 2000s, there was, in fact, development that occurred in the land to the west and to the south of what I'm just going to generically refer to as the Brown property. And ultimately, there were two homes located at number 9 Settlers Road and number 11 Settlers Road, which were constructed immediately adjacent to the Browns' property at 261 West Street. In May of 2011, Mr. Brown's attorney had set forth to the town some suggested changes in the design of the range that it was believed would enhance the safety of the range operation. In August of 2011, Mr. Brown invited myself, Town Administrator John Kader, and Town Council David Dineski to his property to walk the property and see the range and get a close-up look. Following that time, I will tell you that my opinion that it was not what I believed to be a firing range, I held true to, in the interest of public safety with the adjoining homes, which you'll see some pictures of momentarily. There was a great deal of correspondence that occurred between the town and the various neighbors and the attorneys involved that took place between the August visit of 2011 and into the fall of 2012. There was some hope initially that some middle ground might be found, but it was never achieved to the satisfaction of all the parties that were involved. In October of 2012, the Browns did file suit against myself and Town Administrator Kader in land court in Boston. In November of 2012, the land court ruled that it did not have jurisdiction, and the matter was transferred to the Worcester Superior Court. On December 13th of 2013, Judge Gordon found in favor of the Browns concerning the use of the firing range, provided that they effect improvements recommended by their own range experts. Judge Gordon went on to leave what amounted to one last option for the Settlers Road neighbors. And from his decision, I quote, "As a matter of policy, defendants, me, may be right that the Section 12E, parentheses D exemption, which contains no limiting definition of a range, fails to strike a proper balance in furthering the interests of public safety. Perhaps." but if that is the case, it is for the legislature to enact a more restrictive exemption for range owners, or for towns like Northborough to enact appropriate local ordinances or implement more protective modifications to their zoning. And with the judge's decision was the birth of Article 58 that we're here to discuss this evening. What is a firing range? Is it anything so declared by its owner as being a range? Is it a target nailed to a tree? State law offers no definition. I'm a 38-year shooter, and when somebody asks me what a firing range is, truthfully, this is what I envision. Massachusetts general laws do set forth minimum distance requirements for hunting. 500 feet from any dwelling in use, which is from Chapter 131, Section 58, as well as prohibiting the discharge of a firearm within 500 feet of a dwelling or other building in use, which is from Chapter 269, Section 12E. This bylaw seeks to extend that same 500-foot minimum standard to firing ranges. An aerial view of the Brown property at 261 West Street. The boundaries are shown here in red. West Street is at the top of the screen. Settlers Road runs along the left side of the screen, as does the Northborough-Shrewsbury town line. The firing range in question is shown by a yellow arrow leading from a small barn that serves as a firing line and extending to what you'll hear me refer to as a bullet trap / target stand, which is located at the tip of the arrow. There are 2 Settlers Road homes immediately adjacent to the property line with 261 West Street. These 2 right here. This slide shows a close-up view of the physical relationship between the properties at 261 West Street, 9 Settlers Road, and 11 Settlers Road. The town's GIS mapping system provided the measurements. The distance from the firing line, or what you're going to hear me refer to as and I mean no disrespect by it, it's how it has always been known to me as a shoot shack. The distance from the firing line, or the shoot shack, to the target / ammo trap is approximately 298 feet. The shoot shack is 119 feet from the west property line of 261 West Street, while the target ammo trap is approximately 21 feet from the property line. A short stone wall runs along the red property line shown. There are no other fences or barriers between the 2 pieces of property. The target ammo trap is approximately 120 feet from the sandbox at 11 Settlers Road. Sandbox being in this area and the target right here. And I'll have various views of that from the ground level for you. The dwelling at number 9 Settlers Road which conveniently is depicted by the 9, is approximately 193 feet from the chute shack. The dwelling at 11 Settlers Road is approximately 277 feet from the chute shack. The chute shack is approximately 408 feet from the Browns' residence at 261 West Street. This slide shows the warning signs that Mr. Brown has posted on his property in several locations. This is a view of the barn chute shack that I referred to. And the sign states, "Caution, shooting area, do not cross wall." A port or opening in the south side of the chute shack faces the target/ammo trap. Inside the barn, a bench supports rifles being fired, while a video system views both the target area and the yard. This slide shows the only barrier that separates the Settlers Road homes from the firing range, the stone wall. The target ammo trap has a large sign posted on it, also warning of the presence of the shooting area. The backyards of the Settlers Road homes, number 9 and number 11, are just off the right side of this slide. This is a view of the chute shack from the sandbox at number 9 Settlers Road. Again, the only barrier is the stone wall. This slide is a view towards the chute shack from the rear patio at number 11 Settlers Road. And again, there are no intermediate barriers or side berms. What I'm about to play for you is a video clip taken from the rear patio at number 11 Settlers Road. The video will pan from the north to the south along the path that a bullet would travel from the chute shack to the target and ammo trap. The barn is in the center. You're following the firing lane, and difficult to pick out, but behind the fence is the target and ammo trap. This slide is a view towards the target and ammo trap from the sandbox at 11 Settlers Road. A large sign is visible on the west side of the target ammo trap. A smaller warning sign is visible on a tree facing 11 Settlers Road. To dispel one rumor that was circulated in town, there is no attempt to eliminate hunting in the town of Northborough. This bylaw has absolutely no impact on Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 58 at all. Another rumor claimed that the bylaw would prohibit the discharge of a firearm in Northborough. Also incorrect. The only impact would be the addition of a 500-foot minimum distance for a firing range. Again, the same distance currently in place for hunting or otherwise discharging a firearm. We do have another bylaw in town, which is, the bylaw is 2-44-080, and it's titled Use of Firearms. However, that bylaw addresses what people do on other people's property. It does not impact what occurs on your own property. There's been discussion about whether this is going to be some groundbreaking thing that's going to impact firing ranges. That ship has sailed. The towns of Arlington, Belmont, and Winthrop already prohibit the discharge of a firearm. This bylaw impacts firing ranges in order to maintain the safe distance that is already in place, as I said, in particular for hunting. This slide shows the approximate years, and I say approximate because some of these may have been the year that clearing may have begun. The point being, looking through, the homes on the west side and south side of the Brown property were all clearly developed after 1994 when the Browns established their range. And again, on this you can see the blue arrow, which is the firing lane, and the star representing where the target area and ammo trap exists. Other homes, as you can see, on the north and east side were existing prior to the range being established. So what are we not doing? We're not trying to prohibit hunting. Your chief is not anti-gun. I've been a shooter for a long time. I own plenty of weapons, both work and personal. It's not what we're here for. We are not trying to prohibit other forms of firearm discharging. We're talking about firing ranges. We're not impacting anyone's right to bear arms. I believe that in 11 years as your chief, anyone that's dealt with me over firearms licensing issues will pretty much have to face the fact that I have not ever been adversarial or difficult in any way. It's not my goal, never has been. What we do seek to accomplish is to provide one common 500-foot standard. We want to ensure the safety of children and families. We want to eliminate the operation, bluntly, of one non-commercial, privately owned firing range abutting a residential area. And we look to prevent similar firing ranges from being constructed unless they adhere to the 500-foot minimum or have written permission from the abutting landowners. Decided that a good spot to look for some guidance on how ranges should be constructed was from the 674-page NRA range source book. Of particular interest in the guidelines were the calls for protective backstops, and the recommended guideline is for a 20-foot high backstop. The same guidelines call for an 8-foot high side berm, which would run alongside the path that the bullet would take from the point that it's fired until the target. And as you have seen, there is currently no side berm. As I have mentioned a couple of times, I've been a shooter myself for a long time. I will tell you this. I have never stood downrange alongside a lane of fire. And I have never seen a firing range where that behavior was tolerated in any way, shape, or form. Where are we always? We are behind the firing line. It's common range safety. From the NRA's range book, outdoor, private, and test ranges. Safety for the operator of a private range or test facility is just as important as it is for a public range where many users participate. Anytime a range is located in a heavily populated area, yeah, we can debate that, whether you want to call it heavily or not, the public has a right to expect. One, the range will be appropriately located in relation to their property. There will be no physical damage to adjoining property from its use. Sound generated from its use will meet local regulations. There will be no trespass related to the range. The range will not cause the perception of a health threat. The individual range builder must build a facility that does not adversely affect surrounding areas. Reiterating, chapter and verse, if anybody wants to look. Side berms should be 8 feet high. Backstops should be 20 feet high. From Mr. Brown's perspective and the conversations we've had, and I want to stress that throughout all of this, Mr. Brown has been a gentleman. I've enjoyed what I believe has been a very positive relationship with him this entire time. I will tell you bluntly, I find him to be a very interesting person. From his perspective, I believe, from conversations that we've had, he feels he was there first. He constructed what he believed to be a safe range. He believed that the property next to his would not be built upon. Warning signs were posted to warn neighbors when houses were built on the property next to his. From the neighbor's perspective, there's no safe barrier to protect their home, their children, their property from accidents. They truly believe that their children are not safe in their own backyards. Please be aware that currently, any of your neighbors, without this bylaw, any of your neighbors can decide to legally establish and construct a firing range in their own yard and legally use it, regardless of the size of their property. Only through this proposed bylaw can this be safely regulated. The Settlers Road neighbors are exposed to a potential downrange fan of gunfire. Common firing range safety protocols prevent spectators from standing in this unprotected area. Will this proposed bylaw put Mr. Brown out of business? No, this is not a commercial range. This is a private range constructed for his personal use. If this bylaw is passed, will Mr. Brown be unable to shoot? Unless a 500-foot minimum distance can be maintained or written permission obtained from impacted neighbors, Mr. Brown will have to do what the rest of us do: go to a gun range or a rod and gun club. One of the neighbors imparted one story to me that I'm going to share with you. Her 4-year-old's birthday party was held, warm weather, out in the backyard. Parents and kids at play, celebrating the birthday party, when shooting began. She tells me that it literally degenerated into people yelling, running, and screaming. We all have a responsibility that we don't need bylaws for to be responsible neighbors to one another. I'm a grandfather. I'm horrified at the thought of having my kids start to run in their minds for their lives because of the sound of gunfire. A quote from David Luke, the technical team advisor for the National Rifle Association. And this is taken from the 3rd National Shooting Range Symposium. The bottom line is to develop a shooting range in harmony with adjacent properties and where safety is provided to prevent adjacent properties from experiencing any encroachment. All neighbors must be safe from injury. The overall responsibility of the range owner and operator is to stop fired bullets before they exit the property line. Those are not my words. Again, those are the words from David Luke, technical team advisor for the National Rifle Association. I will leave you with this final thought. Does the recreational right of a property owner trump the safety right of his neighbors? That concludes my presentation. Thank you, and I'll entertain any questions.
Are there any questions from the floor on Article 58?
Chief Leahy, Jay Ferguson, 2 Increased Ward Drive. You make a very convincing argument, but I guess I have a couple of questions. First of all, would this ordinance have been proposed if the neighbors had not complained?
No, it would not. We had no other situations. Again, in the 11 years I've been here as your chief, I have not had any other firing range issues.
Then I guess my comment would be that the neighbors are pretty stupid and, in fact, very irresponsible for them to either purchase or have a house built by a firing range when you know it's there, to let your kids play out in that kind of an area without building your own fence for protection. Seems like it's the neighbor's fault and not the person that owns the property. Thank you.
Right over here. Yes.
Thank you, Chief. Very nice presentation, and I will agree with you that you are not anti-gun and you've been very easy to deal with as far as licenses go. I noticed in your presentation you mentioned a couple other solutions to the lack of borders on Mr. Brown's property. Unfortunately, by going forward with this article, that wouldn't allow him those options. And I do agree with the sentiment Mr. Ferguson expressed that Mr. Brown was there, others chose to move in next to him, and then they chose to complain about it. I do have a little bit of a problem with that. In my life, my family's lived next to a sewage treatment plant, fireworks factory, and near an airport. I would be very comfortable living next to a shooting range. The other issue I have with this is we're taking a right away from Mr. Brown here. Obviously, we're balancing safety against his rights. I don't think this article is the way to go. If he needs to put up berms, I would like him to have that option. I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right over here, please, in this aisle.
Hi, Ken Kennedy, 24 Maple Lane. First, I want to thank the Chief for his presentation. I think that you did a great job trying to be balanced and try to present all the facts, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I've lived in Northborough for 22 years, moving here following 10 years of service in the U.S. Army. I currently work in Boston with the Department of Homeland Security, and I appreciate the 32 years that you've been shooting, Chief. I've been shooting since I was 4 years old. That makes it 50 years of shooting. I'm a firearms enthusiast. I shoot competitively. I collect historical firearms, and I teach firearm safety courses. I think it's interesting that you brought up the 600-plus page NRA guide. I might be one of the few people in here who have actually read that from cover to cover. And of course, what that guide gives you is guidance on establishing new ranges. It doesn't address existing ranges, which is what we're talking about here. When I first heard about this situation, what prompted this article, I have to say that my first knee-jerk reaction was, no, that's just not acceptable. But then I did some research, and I read the background of the situation, including the decision of the Worcester Superior Court, which you can download on the internet. And I found out a few interesting facts here. Talks about Mr. Brown purchasing the property, as we talked about. Shortly thereafter, made substantial improvements so that the property could serve as a site for target shooting, and this was in 1995, it says in the court document. It talks about him building a firing port within a barn structure, reinforced with baffles to restrict the angle at which the gun could be fired through the port, thereby ensuring that fired rounds would not stray outside the cleared path between the firing port and the target. He also installed a TV monitoring system, the shooter in the barn, so they could see anyone who might approach the line of fire. And finally, a laser fence and signs that were posted around the property cautioning visitors that the area was being used for target shooting. And for 15 years, Mr. Brown was using the range for target shooting on a regular basis until the situation at hand came up. It talks about how they actually had a range expert during the court hearing who said that the range did satisfy prevailing standards of range construction and were were in general use and acceptance at the time, and that Mr. Brown undertook to invest thousands of additional dollars to make further safety improvements suggested by a civil engineer. How much? Well, according to the court documents, Mr. Brown, the record reflects that Mr. Brown invested in excess of $25,000 to ensure that the property bears all the functional and safety attributes of a bona fide facility used for small arm target practice. And again, the bottom line was the judge found for Mr. Brown, establishing that it was in fact a target range and that he did come under the exemption. And I have to say, in reading this, with my 50 years experience shooting, I've never heard of a range having that amount of safety equipment involved. I mean, that just wows me that that amount of effort was put in to make this range as safe as possible. And as much as I'm a supporter of Second Amendment rights, I realize that the situation here is really about property rights. What should property owners in Northborough be allowed to do with their own property? The town, and the Board of Selectmen in particular, has a strong history of supporting property rights. And if that were not the case, there'd be no affordable housing in town, would there? I realize that boards change over time, and maybe support of things like this fade, but I still believe that the residents of this town believe in property rights. When we consider the reasonableness of an owner's activities on his own property, I really think there needs to be three tests. One, is there a history of the activity causing personal injury or property damage? Number two, is it likely the activity will cause such injury or damage in the future? And three, is the activity illegal? We also have to ask ourselves, what is fair? What is reasonable? If a person, as was noted here recently, just a few minutes ago, if a person buys a piece of property and builds a house next to a sewage treatment plant, is it reasonable to demand the plant be shut down when the wind direction shifts? I don't think so. The owners of these abutting properties knew there was an active target range on Mr. Brown's property. Now they have the right to say he needs to shut it down after nearly 20 years? How is that fair? And why have we not discussed the option of them building a berm on their property to protect their house? So we have to ask the question again, how many private target ranges, legally defined and established as such in court, are there in Northborough? One. And this article was introduced shortly after Mr. Brown's victory in court. Bylaws should be crafted to address community issues, things that impact the town residents as a whole.
You have 30 seconds.
Yet this law proposes targets, this bylaw proposal targets one individual. If you like me, when you hear about a proposal that impacts one person, hair stands on the back of my head, and that's a signal that something is wrong. So in conclusion, Mr. Brown's range activity has caused no harm or damage since 1995. He spent thousands of dollars to make sure that there'd be no harm in the future, and his range activity has been declared legal by the Worcester Superior Court. I ask that the citizens stand by the property rights of Mr. Brown and vote against Article 58. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Thank you. Teresa Capobianco, Samuel Gamwell Road. Chief Leahy, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the time that you put into that.
Thank you.
It's going to be hard to follow that gentleman right there. I was struck by your comment that this didn't look like a firing range to you. I grew up out in a much smaller town in Massachusetts, and my family are avid shooters, and grew up just firing into our firing range in the backyard. That didn't have what Mr. Brown has at his property. And our neighbors, expressed concern over it, but we worked with them. I think part of the problem here is a complete lack of communication between the residents on Settlers Road and Mr. Brown and his wife. Had they actually communicated with each other from the beginning, perhaps this would not have ended up in protracted litigation. Unfortunately, it did. And I too read the decision from the Worcester Superior Court, which I also read the docket, and it would appear as though you yourself and Mr. Kader have appealed that decision up to the appeals court. What this bylaw does effectively, if passed tonight, will short circuit that appeal and basically kill the lawsuit. And that, in turn, affects Mr. Brown and his wife's right to pursue justice. And that's unfair to them. Also, this bylaw is directed at one homeowner and his wife. It does not have any extensive purpose in this town. It is unfair for any member of this town, especially I would say one of our town officials, to target out this one singular individual and create a bylaw that will effectively terminate a right that he otherwise would have under statute. He hasn't done anything outside of 269-12E. He hasn't acted in a way that violates that statute, and the Superior Court found as much. And I personally, as a citizen of this town, find it disgraceful that we are sitting here tonight trying to eliminate this one singular owner's property rights for the benefit of a couple of houses that went up years after he spent all that money putting this particular range together. It's unfair to him. And it's, as a citizen, I'm ashamed that this is what's on our warrant at this year's town meeting. And I also, what might have changed my mind, Chief Leahy, on this was if you had come in here and said that in the sandbox there were stray bullets, or there were casings, or that there was some issue with real issue with respect to Mr. Brown and his wife not practicing their shooting in a safe manner. And I haven't heard that at all from you. I have not heard that there has been one singular incident of harm or something that could be evidenced as harm to these neighbors. The unfortunate problem for them is that the developer on Settlers Road created two houses on back lots because he knew he could fit them in there. Didn't bother to do his homework to find out who the neighbors were. And now as a result, an extraordinary amount of money has been spent by the Settlers Road homeowners to purchase those homes. And they're upset there's a shooting range back there. But that's not Mr. Brown's fault. He didn't create that situation. He did his due diligence. The developer did not, the broker did not, and the buyers of those homes did not. And I would vote no on this article. Thank you.
If I could ask if we could refrain from the applause, we could move through this article a little bit more rapidly. Thank you. Right over here.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Moderator. My name is Adrienne Sutton. I live at 243 West Street. I became a US citizen at the end of last year. I have recently registered as a voter, but not in time to vote this evening. I've been told I have to ask permission to talk.
And it's about Article 58, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm going to allow you to speak.
Thank you. I would like, sorry if it's too loud. I live at 243 West Street. Mr. Brown is actually my neighbor, and I would actually like to address the points of safety, as well as due diligence of somebody that actually has purchased a property, seeing signs all around, advertising the fact that there was actually a shooting area, but being responsible people who are concerned for our children, what we chose to do is pick up the phone and actually have an appointment, go to see Mr. Brown, speak with Mr. Brown, have him walk us around his property, show us exactly what it is for a range. And I want to point out, this isn't Bonanza, it isn't High Chaparral, this is a gentleman that has a hobby. And this gentleman practices that hobby in a very, very safe way. I have 3 small daughters who wander back and forth across to see Mr. and Mrs. Brown. And we're still here and everything is fine. And I really, really find it very disappointing that this is my first experience of the American democratic process, because to me, bylaws like this shouldn't actually be for town meetings. Thank you.
Selectman Amperson.
Lynn Carmody, Green Street.
Wait. I actually acknowledge Selectman Amperson first.
Jeff Amberson. First, I'd like to say I'm speaking as an individual and not necessarily representing the board. First, to the woman that just got up there, I think you may see democracy in action tonight, and we'll see that by the end of this vote. Yeah. First, I just want to say I have the utmost respect for the chief. I would say 99% of the time we agree on the majority of the issues. But I can tell you on this one, after a lot of careful thought, that we disagree. When I was first made aware of Article 1, I'll tell you I didn't have an issue with it. Having the same setbacks in place for target shooting that apply to hunting did not appear unreasonable to me. But I think this issue tonight is a little more complex than that. And as a result, I've had a change of heart. I think we need to look at what started the ball rolling on this article. This is a direct response to a neighborhood dispute between two individuals, and it's essentially an isolated incident. We haven't had, and the chief said it himself, we haven't had a lot of complaints in town about, or any other complaints that I know of, regarding target shooting. In short, I think this article is trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. And my biggest bone of contention regarding this article is I believe it would unfairly penalize an individual, Mr. Brown, who has done nothing wrong. Mr. Brown and his wife bought their property on West Street with the express purpose of building a range. He designed it in a manner which is safe and up to accepted standards. He's utilized that range for over 20 years. There's, from what I can tell and what I've heard and the research that we've done, there have been no incidents or complaints up until recently. The issues that we've heard about tonight started when new neighbors purchased the property next to him. Mr. Brown attempted to work with these neighbors in good faith. The town tried to mediate the dispute. But ultimately, the discussions between the two parties failed, and they could not reach an agreeable resolution. As a result, the matter ended up in the courts. After reviewing the evidence, the judge, when all was said and done, ruled for Mr. Brown. He determined that the activities were safe and compatible with the laws of the Commonwealth. You know, I think it's important for everyone to remember here tonight that Mr. Brown did his homework before purchasing his property. He made sure that the planned use for the property was acceptable. He followed all the rules. He made a sizable investment constructing his range in a safe and acceptable manner. He has never had any complaints until very recently. I would ask folks, when you consider this, to consider, is it really fair and reasonable for the town now to change the rules on the Browns in order to circumvent the decision of the court? I don't believe it is. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Lynn Carmody, 222 Green Street. I have a son who's a competitive shooter, so that's why I stand here tonight. And I understand the public safety, and if we want to look at it from that perspective, Chief Leahy, I understand that. But you showed a presentation of what the NRA considers the safe operation of a range. Nothing up there said anything about 500 feet. I heard about berms. I heard about protection. And those berms don't just protect the gunfire, they protect the noise that you mentioned, the kids running from. It serves two purposes. So I would ask that if we as a town want to look at public safety, let's look at what the NRA puts out as safe guidelines, because there are people who may not have the 500 feet range in their property, but they could put berms up and meet the safety that we're trying to meet, as well as them being able to use their property in the way that they want to use their property, and kind of make it a win-win for everybody. Thank you.
Mr. Niebuhr.
Richard Niebuhr, 62 Whitney Street, and I had a lot to say, but a lot of that's been covered. I would like to say I've known Chief Leahy since he first came to town, and I have the utmost respect for him. I don't know any other officer, ever met anyone with the integrity that our chief has here. And I believe he has a very hard job to do, and he's enforcing the law, and he's doing it right. What I would like to say, though, is this 500 feet that everyone keeps talking about, and that is a state law, is really only a feel-good situation. I'd rather have this gentleman's shooting range 10 feet from my house than obey this 500-foot law. A BB gun will travel 550 feet. A pellet gun is accurate to 654 feet. Any handgun will shoot 1 to 2 miles. 9mm Lugers, 45mm guns, and 44 Magnums will shoot 1.5 miles accurately. 500 feet is nothing. There's no safety zone to this at all. A BB gun may not hurt you, but it can still put your eye out, even within that 500 feet. Now, I believe this gentleman has done everything right, like they said from day one, and the only resolution that I can see, the chief wants to stop any future target ranges from just popping up anywhere, and I think that's good with this law. So I would like to make a motion that an amendment be put to this article. That amendment would be that no existing private shooting range, shooting gallery, or other approved area designated or built for the purpose of target shooting shall be affected by this bylaw. This will make it impossible for any future ranges to pop up within the 500 feet, but still allow this gentleman to have his shooting range now.
Do we need a second?
Okay, our huddle's over, okay? When we last spoke, there was a motion to amend Article 58. And the motioner is right over there. I'm sorry, I forgot where he was. And what we have before us is the amendment to Article 58. And the amendment says, no existing shooting range, shooting gallery, or other approved area designed or built for the purpose of target shooting shall be affected by this bylaw as of April 30th, 2014. Any discussion, any questions on the amendment of Article 58? Does this have to do with the amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
So Jeffrey Aiken, 11 Settlers Road. First off, thank you for the presentation, and I thought it was a great representation. My wife and daughter and I moved to 11 Settlers Road in December of this past year, so we are new residents. So obviously, it's of great importance to us, and specifically to the amendment. You know, I think the safety of our community applies both to the future as well as to existing residents, in particular, those of us on 11 Settlers Road. You know, I commend Mr. Brown for the safety, and as we've all, I think we've heard from a number of people, the things he's done. You know, and I think we can all appreciate that. But I think the greater issue really is the safety of the community and those on Settlers Road. It's tough, right? Like I get the arguments that are being made, and I understand the passion that I'm sure he has for his sport. But I think as sure as I am torn, I assume many of us are all torn in that way, and that there is a safety issue. And you know, I speak from having heard from my neighbors, obviously only having been there 3 months, but there have been safety issues, and clay pigeons, as an example, have been found both on my property and on the other budding property, 9 Settlers Road. So again, I think there's a much bigger story here, and I hope that in that context and the safety of both my family and the families of all of us here, that consideration is taken into place. So thank you.
Right over here, please.
Leslie Harrison, 28 Moore Lane. I'm honestly undecided on how I would vote on the original article, but one thing I did want to say about safety concerns is I hear there are no stray bullets have been, no one's been injured to date. Do we want to have a regret that someone does get shot, some incident does occur, and we could have prevented it? So I think the safety concerns shouldn't be overlooked. I would certainly support the amended version. It seems like a good compromise. It obviously doesn't address the specific concerns tonight, but we are here as a community to look at the bigger picture and not necessarily, as some people have said, individual disputes. So I'm still undecided on the original article. I will definitely support the amended article, but I don't think we should overlook the potential for safety issues and have a regret to say, oops, you know, someone gets hurt, and what if we had supported that article?
Right over here.
I would want to first take the opportunity to say I have a tremendous amount of respect for Chief Leahy, and he's a fantastic chief. As to the amendment, I don't want to see Northborough say that you can't have a new range in town. What if somebody wanted to build an indoor range? What if somebody wanted to build a safe range? Is there any reason not to have a gun range in Northborough? And heck, if you had a new gun range in Northborough that was well done, it might be very profitable business and bring some tax revenue and income and jobs into the area. So I would strongly oppose the amendment to the article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Durkin, 48 Moore Lane. I'm against the amendment to the motion, and I'm against the motion. And I understand the fear around guns, but when we grew up, and we grew up out in the Brook fields, you know, hunting, fishing, spending our entire days on the land was part of my family's heritage. We moved to Northborough, and we continued that tradition. And the chief has been a shooter for 38 years, and I've been a shooter for over 40. And I didn't realize the significance of the right to bear arms and the freedoms and safeties that imperiled us, or that have us as a citizen of the United States. And as we were moving my parents' house out about 6 months ago, I come across a shooting range in the basement on 11 Pleasant Street that my father had constructed for my nephews when they were little boys, to learn how the use of firearms and to carry yourself with dignity, into the responsibility of firearms and everything that goes along with shooting and having a firearm. So, but I think the larger issue, forget the firearms and the safety issue, is property rights. Every day, and in this meeting in particular, every day and every night and every way, there was a new proposed bylaw to restrict property rights. Whether it was, you can't do this, you can't do that, now you can't have a shooting range. I live in the woods off Moore Lane. There are 14 houses on 110 acres. 8 of us have licenses to carry, and the idea of going to a shooting range, why it's nice, is a waiting list in Boylston of 75 people on a waiting list. It could be 2 years to fill it. They're at capacity. The other one in Boylston has a 3-year waiting list. A lot of the fishing games get filled up. We shoot on my property, not often, but maybe 3 or 4 times a year because we can, and we're back in the woods. But the property rights issue, to me, is paramount. We've got to stop restricting the rights to own our property and do what we do with it. We pay considerable amount of taxes for education, health, welfare, and public safety. But every time you lay another overlay district and or another restriction on your property, you are impacting the value of your property, and you're impacting the value of your community, and you're impacting the value of your tax revenue. So I'd urge you to vote no on the amendment, vote no on the First Amendment, vote no on anything, and let's go home. Thank you.
Mr. Leland.
Everybody here has covered all the points, so I won't spend the time to read through all of these. I have been on the site. That gives me one advantage to many of you people here, as has the chief. The chief has presented an excellent argument. He is representing the Board of Selectmen. They've been involved in the litigation. I've got the last speaker, and I've got the chief beat. I was an infantry officer in the Korean War. I'm a representative of a rod and gun club. I was sorry to hear somebody talk about the fact that, and it was the chief, mentioned about the fear that the neighbors had heard on the children. My grandchildren are gunning. My daughter's gun. My son does. And to me, the only thing that's worse than a fear of guns is a fear of water. Everyone should be comfortable and familiar. That's what made this country strong. I saw the difference in the troops that came in. When I was in the military, the ones that had familiarity with a weapon were the much better troopers and much better soldiers on our behalf to protect us. The chief has got a major responsibility. He and his excellent team of people have done that. He's been faced with a very difficult problem. To be in front of a number of you who would like to use him as the target is not, it really takes a lot of bravery. But the point remains that there's got to be some sort of a settlement. The circumstances are changing. I hear Mike, and I agree with him most of the time. We do have a problem. I am going to vote for the amendment. I would oppose the bylaw in a heartbeat. But the amendment does give the chiefs and the Board of Selectmen some protection in future circumstances. While I've been on the site, and I'll tell you, Mr. Brown has done something so good that it's even better than the other ranges that I represent. And I've represented and been in a number of gun clubs. We had it over in Southborough. We had an incident. We got it straightened out with programs. The stuff that Mr. Brown has done and his lovely wife is excellent. I'm not uncomfortable, and I could live next to him in a heartbeat and not be worried about the range, because there are restrictions on where you can even aim the gun, much less having a shot go wild. And I don't know where the ones that the previous speaker spoke about, but as far as I'm concerned, I think that range is a very safe one, even though on the charts it doesn't look that way. So that's why my beloved bride, who and I disagree a little bit on this, because she saw the sandbox and, oh boy, the kids, and immediately. But we went up and saw it, and I am very comfortable with this program. So I will vote for the amendment, and then with the amendment, I could vote for the main article. If the rest of you decide to the contrary, so be it. But then that's our democracy and our America in work.
I don't think we've had all the opportunity to have people make their statements yet. Mr. Niebuhr has requested that he be able to respond to some comments that were made to his amendment. I indicated that I wish to have more people have the opportunity to express their thoughts. Ma'am, you are out of order. I have made a statement. Thank you.
Yes, this amendment, two gentlemen ago said that this amendment would stop any future gun ranges. The purpose of this amendment is to allow this current gun range to stay in operation. But any future gun ranges will go by this warrant article. As the chief wants it, any future gun ranges can come into town and be built, but they will have to be within further than 500 feet from any house, which is a state law and which will now be Northborough's law. So this amendment does not hurt any future gun ranges from coming into town.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jennifer Rylander, Bull, 9 Settlers Road. So now that you all know where I live and you're not going to like what I say, please don't start pelting me. I also have to say that I am an avid Second Amendment advocate, and I am also someone who grew up in a house with guns. My father and my brother are both military and both card-carrying members of the NRA. I myself just joined the National Wild Turkey Federation and plan to get my license to carry in July at a workshop they're holding in Auburn this summer. And let me just proceed here. And I really do have mixed emotions about this, but you saw my house that was nicely marked with the red number 9. So you, as I said, you all know where I live, so I feel very uncomfortable right now, but I do have to say something. The Second Amendment states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I would not like to take this right away from anyone who deserves it, and Mr. Brown is one of those people. I appreciate his hobby and his passion for hunting and shooting. But the area where his targets are abut 5 properties. When we bought our property, I just have to comment for the man who stated that we were stupid. I beg to differ, although some people who know me may agree with you. We did do our due diligence. We talked to our realtor, we talked to the builder, we talked to the town, and we talked to the police department. And I think that Chief Leahy would tell you that and I also want to state that I am not the neighbor who started this argument. I am not involved in the lawsuit. This did not come from me. It came from a former neighbor who has since moved, so this is not my doing. When we talked to the police department, they said there is no shooting range there. The builder and the realtor said those are old signs. The police said there couldn't be a shooting range there. The law is the law. You cannot shoot within 500 feet of a property. So I did my due diligence. My husband and I both did our due diligence. And my father and my brother, who are card-carrying members of the NRA, as I mentioned, my father went to the town hall with me and said, what's the deal with this shooting range? We were told there is no shooting range there. The law states there cannot be a shooting range there. You cannot shoot within 500 feet of a property. So I thought our due diligence was done. Just as Mr. Brown did his due diligence, but he was told that those properties were not buildable. That proved not to be true, but the law still stands. I would hate to vote no on this amendment, although part of me wants to, because you saw the proximity, not so much of my house, but of my new neighbor's house. Their swing set is downrange from the shooting range. Is this a shooting range? You know, I don't know, and I think that's what people need to decide. Is this a shooting range or is this not a shooting range? I just couldn't support this and take the chance that there would be an issue before we realized that this was the wrong decision. And please realize that if this article passes, as I understand it, and Chief Leahy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it will not shut down the area in which Mr. Brown enjoys his hobby. It only requires that he obtains permission from the people, that the neighborhood that abut his property, in order for him to shoot. And I would gladly grant him that permission if it were done on a case-by-case basis. I just think that most people, not all people, but most people with any moderate degree of common sense who came to the property would realize that this is an issue of safety and not a Second Amendment issue at all. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, please.
I would just like to clarify one thing, because one of your comments, I'm sure, has left people confused. You and I never had any conversation about that range. I'm not sure who you spoke with at the police department or when you had that conversation. But I just want to make perfectly clear for the people in this room that you were not misled by me in terms of anything to do with the firing range. Thank you.
Yes, over there, please.
Hi, I'm Leah Arnold,
We
11
ca-
Settlers Road. You heard from my husband a minute ago. I am the mom of the very squawky 9-month-old in the back, so I apologize for that, but this
Do not
certainly
apologize for your daughter.
affects her
She
as
is
much as anyone
She is a
else.
town meeting member. She has a right to express her opinion.
And she has been for the last couple hours, but thank you. I do want to say, I think first and foremost, my dad was a Korean War era veteran. My brother, a competitive shooter in the Army. I grew up with guns. I am not anti-gun. I am not arguing the right to bear arms. I am not trying to negatively affect hunting in Northborough. This is purely a matter of safety. I grew up shooting guns myself with a dad and brother, and such avid shooters. The one thing that we were told is never to shoot when you see people, never to shoot when there are children downstream of a rifle shot. And I think that's our biggest concern. Having our daughter here now, even just with us, with the neighbors, the concern is not for the safety of the range. And I absolutely respect the hobby and the competitive shooting that Mr. Brown and his wife do. It is not about us believing that the range or the facility is safe. The concern is for the safety within the parameters or outside of that facility, which is our home and the homes of our neighbors. There is a concern for the clays that have fallen in our yard and in the yards of neighboring houses. That was before we were there, obviously, because there has been no shooting since we've been there. There also is a concern on my part for any novice shooters. Mr. Brown has said that he uses the range to, free of charge, teach safety instruction. That's a concern for me. As a competitive shooter, he may have an excellent safety record. As a novice shooter, I've seen stray bullets go places. That is not the fault of anyone, but that is a safety concern. So those are our two biggest concerns. And it is entirely revolving around safety. I'm not anti-gun. As I said, I am not afraid of weapons. I'm not afraid of guns. I just want to be sure that my family is safe as well as the safety of the families around us. Thank you.
Mr. Pember.
George Pember, 42 Hamilton Road. I have a question for Town Council. In zoning, there's a concept called grandfathering, so that if the town changes its zoning bylaws, something that has always been allowed but now no longer could be allowed under the new zoning bylaw can't be stopped because the people have a grandfathered right. Is grandfathering applicable in this case? In other words, if this law is passed or this bylaw is adopted by the town, does that impact the Browns, or do they have grandfathering protection?
First thing, can you hear me? No. First thing, the proposed bylaw is not a zoning bylaw. It's just a public safety bylaw.
Right.
So in response to your question, it's not something that has been proposed by the town as a zoning amendment or a zoning change.
Okay. Then my comment would be that I'm completely in favor of the amendment. I don't think Mr. Brown should lose the right to do something which has always been valid and legal, but I like Mr. Niebuhr's amendment. I'm going to enthusiastically vote for his amendment.
Over here. James Lee, 49 Lincoln Street. With regards to the amendment, I think that's a noble effort to protect Mr. Brown's right, and also I greatly respect the chief for doing his duty to try to protect neighbors. But the amendment isn't sufficient, and I don't want to come and suggest other amendments because the amendment doesn't address indoor shooting ranges or test facilities. I mean, maybe your hobby is repairing firearms and you want to be able to fire them safely within the confines of your home. And maybe that's an underground facility where the bullet could never leave your property. The bylaw as written, the amendment as added, is insufficient. State law is fine the way it is. Therefore, I'm against the amendment. I'm against the bylaw as written. But I do respect everyone, and I do respect the process. Thank you.
Right over here.
Hi, I'm Mike Long from Church Street. Mr. Lee pretty much finished the last point I was about to make. We've already had 2 amendments to this motion. So far, he's pointed out another area where there might be some other unintended consequences. How many other areas will this put the town laws in conflict with state laws and other unintended consequences? Therefore, I would just ask folks here to just say no. Thank you.
And the other Leland position.
Mr. Leland has already mentioned his bride. And for those of you who don't know, I'm the bride. A little long in the tooth. Anyway, we did go out to see the property today. Mr. Leland stated that he's been a shooter forever anyway. I've never been a shooter. I'm a mother. And so when the chief made this presentation, my first impulse was the safety of the children. I'm still concerned about the safety of the children, which is why I went out today. Now, it seems to me that if the parents are really concerned about the safety of their young children, why would you put a sandbox where you thought there might be danger? That was one of the things that struck me. Another thing was, I said, okay, you give lessons and some of these people are not experienced. Most of the time, when you shoot, it's only with experienced people. He said there's only one person at a time that shoots, and if it's someone who is not experienced, I stand right beside him and my hand is on that person's shoulder. I said, okay, but if I have a pistol in my hand and I'm standing here and I go to shoot and it jerks on me, couldn't that go somewhere else? He said, you stand there and see what happens. When I went like this, if I go up, it's right into what he referred to as baffles. They're wooden structures. And so the bullet cannot go astray. I went to see where it would be if it was on the path of this rifle going down. And I looked out the port. There's no way that rifle can shoot over to the side. It's resting in some arrangement that he has, and it has to go only in one direction. My other thought was, when you talk about the 500 feet for hunters, I think hunters, you don't know where they are. You know where these people are. And so it seems to me that the 500 feet is not as applicable to that situation as it would be people roaming around out in the woods. I voted from the chief's presentation, which I thought was excellent, with the bylaw committee to approve this article. And so tonight I will say that we had a split vote, but I want you to know that one of the people who voted approval is now going to hold up a green card against. Thank you.
Right over here.
Hi, Carl Eisenhofer, 377 Howard Street. I'm concerned that this article will prevent the construction of future ranges that are safe, that have no concerns that we're all discussing right now. I have a nice piece of property. I could build a range there. It would not be in any way unsafe to anybody. And yet, if I had a neighbor who didn't like me, I would be stuck. I could not build such a range.
Right here.
Jean Poteet from 179 West Street. As a point of information, why did the town not attempt to regulate this use through a zoning bylaw amendment and a definition, proposed definition of what a firing range is?
Yes, may I? The course we took, frankly, was on advice of our town council.
It seems to me that if you're presenting information about the design standards of the NRA, it would make sense to include dimensional regulations, lot coverage, and where these things in the future would be approved or not approved as part of a number of changes to the zoning bylaw. Thank you.
You were going to say, Chief? Okay. If the people that are ready to speak have something new to add to this, I'm willing to listen to you. But if we're going to go down the same path, I'm not so willing to do that. Is this new information? New information? Or we'll be the judge of that?
Go ahead, you can cut me off if it's not. One of the big things here is safety, and I think I've heard the solution tonight where we wouldn't need any of these bylaws. The abutters who are concerned about safety, they can certainly build the berms on their property at their expense. Mr. Brown has done an outstanding job. $25,000 is a ton of money.
This is nothing new. You said that earlier. Okay? I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Right over here, please.
Dudley Darling from 14 Increase Ward Drive. Also manage Juniper Hill Golf Course. Initially, when I heard this, I thought it was similar to someone moving into a house beside a pig farm and then complaining about the smell from the pigs. Then I realized it's a little more serious than the smell. It's a safety issue. But that would be akin to moving into a house on Main Street and not seeing the traffic and worrying about your kids running out in the street. Looking at this incident, it kind of reminds me of a golf course I was asked to look at that had 2 houses put in beside the golf course years after the golf course was established. When the contractor was building the house, clearing the land, they found golf balls on the land where the house was being put. So I guess I'm not sure why he didn't figure that there would be golf balls in the future there. They didn't have a target to hit at when they were playing that hole, and I'm sure most golfers do not aim at houses around the periphery of the golf course. But you know, where were the builder's thoughts when he saw this? And I'm sure he probably went to those lots many times, and you know, it should have been obvious to him that there was something going on other than you know, just normal backyard activity. Thank you.
Thank you. Right now we are on the amendment of Article 58, and we need to have a vote on the amendment before we can jump to the next step. This requires a simple majority, and let me tell you what the amendment to Article 58 is. No existing private shooting range, shooting gallery, or other approved area designated or built for the purpose of target shooting shall be affected by this bylaw, effective April 30th, 2014. Once again, a simple majority is required. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your cards. And those opposed? The amendment does not carry. We are back to Article 58. We've had plenty of discussion on Article 58. Unless there's something that is earth-shatteringly new.
I believe it is new. I think there is an aspect of this matter that has not been touched upon yet. You can't hear me?
Name and address, please.
I'm Donald Curtis at 8 Fisk Drive. This is a matter of noise rather than a matter of safety, because, and it's legal noise. If you live next to Route 290, you know there's going to be noise. If you live next to the fire station or a hospital, you know you may be wakened in the night with ambulance noise. Now you have a couple choices. You can try to insulate against noise, or you can accept the noise, or you can move elsewhere. Now in this particular situation, the party that the kids were at was not broken up because of whistling bullets. It was broken up because of noise. And so I say that these neighbors tried to suppress the noise. In the first place, they should have known the noise was there before they even moved in. If they decided to accept the noise, they didn't like it. They tried to suppress it by going to court, but the judge says it's legal noise. I will not stop it. So now what do? Well, they take a little bit out of Professor Harold Hill's famous story of the music man. We got trouble here in River City. We got noise, lots of noise. And I want you folks to be aware of that noise. They probably even rewrote the song. 76 loud bangs make a lot of noise.
Could you please
and
focus?
I don't like the noise.
Could you please focus? Focus.
Slow down? Okay, I'll try. Thank you. Oh, the microphone. Okay. So the point being that apparently safety of the children is not an issue. The issue that may be here in place is legal noise that they are opposing. And they have come to town meeting asking us to turn into bullies and stop Mr. Brown from using his shooting range. And I suggest that I will not be a bully and oppress Mr. Brown. Thank you.
Okay. Back at Article 58, I will ask for a recommendation from the Board of Selectmen, please.
The Board of Selectmen recommends approval of this article.
This is what you're voting on. Someone's waving at me. Are we ready to go? Everyone's on the same page. Good. This is what you're voting on for Article 58. I move the town vote to amend the Northborough Town Code, Part 3, Public Safety, by adding a new Chapter 3-52, Discharge of Firearms, as set forth in the warrant, but with the following additional sentence. This chapter shall not apply to the discharge of blank cartridges for ceremonial or military honors purposes by a color guard or organization of war veterans in accordance with the Section 39 of Chapter 148 of the General Laws. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 58 does not pass. Did I hear a motion to reconsider? Can the motioner identify themselves, please? Where's the right there, Rick Courier? Okay. And is there some new information that you have since we last voted?
I'm not sure, but we just want to reconsider.
Okay. And there was a second to that reconsideration. For those of you new to the town meeting process, reconsideration has been used in this town as a method to, quote unquote, lock the vote in, to make sure that, you know, the people that are going to make decisions in the rest of the town meeting don't abscond with this vote. And we have so many more articles to go over. So it is counterintuitive, because if you vote to reconsider, that opens up more debate about Article 58. If you vote not to reconsider, it closes the debate, it closes the door. There's not a chance to open that up again for the rest of town meeting. Is that clear? With that being said, all those in favor of reconsideration of Article 58, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Motion to reconsider does not carry. Article 59, Selectman Hutchins.
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to amend the Northborough Town Code Part 2 General Legislation by adding a new Chapter 2-56, Fingerprint-Based Criminal History Records Check, as set forth in the warrant.
Second. Motion has been made and seconded, and the presentation is by Police Chief Mark Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. For any of you I haven't met, good evening. I promise you this will be
Mark, you're
a
chasing,
whole lot closer.
Chief, you're chasing them away. What's going on?
Yeah. Thanks, David. Civil fingerprinting does not imply that we, up until this time, have been uncivil in the manner in which we fingerprint people. It presents an opportunity for us that it will enhance public safety. We currently issue town permits for solicitors and canvassers, people that come knocking on your door, ice cream truck vendors, and we also license alcohol beverage licenses. The current town bylaw, 3-44-050, titled Investigation of Applicant, states that the chief of police shall investigate the applicant's reputation as to morals and integrity. We currently rely upon a driver's license or other suitable form of identification to identify the applicant and conduct computer checks. Mass General Law, Chapter 6, Section 172B.5, states that municipalities may, by local ordinance, require applicants for licenses in specified occupations to submit a full set of fingerprints for the purpose of conducting a state and national criminal history records check. The fingerprint check produces a more thorough and accurate identification of the applicant and his or her criminal past than just relying on a photo identification card. The checks that we have conducted to date have prevented the issuance of solicitor's permits for people who have been convicted of home burglary, home invasion, armed robbery, sex offenses, larceny, and fraud from visiting your home and trying to sell you things. So as much as you may not have enjoyed the people that did come, trust me, you would not have liked the ones who did not. To adopt this, and this is a fairly new state law, it does require that the town must, number one, adopt a local ordinance, this bylaw. Number two, have a civil fingerprinting policy. It's our intention to use the Commonwealth of Massachusetts model municipal civil fingerprinting policy for occupational licensing verbatim and establish a fee. The current fee we charge, and we've charged for years, is $10. I will tell you that that does not cover the amount of time it spends our dispatcher to explain to people how to fill out the form. The new fee would be established at $100, where $30 of it, by state law, is deposited into the state's firearms fingerprint identity verification trust fund, and the remainder of the fee may be retained by the licensing authority for costs associated with the administration of the system. In our case, the remaining $70 would be deposited directly into the town general fund. As I said, we would be extending this to also apply to the manager of the premises license for an alcoholic beverage sales. This is a license in an extremely regulated business already. It's just the frosting on the cake so we know everything we need to know about the license holder. As permitted by law, of course, it would also apply to ice cream truck vendors, because we'd like to think that the nice man in the ice cream truck selling ice cream to your children is appropriate. And this would not apply to, and I quote from our bylaw, any person residing within the town of Northborough and engaged in the pursuit of soliciting for charitable, benevolent, fraternal, religious, or political activities as per our existing town bylaw 3-44-010B. And of course, the finest example I can give you, Girl Scouts selling cookies. It's not applicable. I will tell you that the largest problem that we've had are with folks who come to your door, other than students, trying to sell you magazines. Please find some other method to procure your favorite magazine than dealing with them. That is the lion's share of where the problems have come from, and they have little regard for any town's soliciting or canvassing bylaws. They will come in until they're detected, And when we escort them back to the town line or give them the option to come register, they'll typically go and then try and shoot back in. It's more of a game than anything else. And that completes my presentation, and I'll entertain any questions.
Any questions on Article 59?
Charlie Cleary, Juniper Brook Road. Thank you, Chief. I was wondering, I read this completely, I thought I did, but I can't figure out what is the punishment if somebody tries to solicit without the proper license. If an ice cream truck vendor comes in and he doesn't have a license, is there a punishment? Is there any way that we can keep him out by punishing him?
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing. What we have found in the past is that the most convincing statement is that we will explain to people that you are in violation of a town bylaw, and we always give them the first opportunity to just either leave the community or come to the police station, follow the paperwork, and go through the normal process. It doesn't go beyond that. Yeah. Our town bylaw, I believe we have a $50 fine that's associated with it. We would typically charge somebody for a violation of a town ordinance and
right. Would this
rather file charges in district court to try and obtain the fruits of their crime. In other words, their book, all the things that they don't want to let go of, they'd rather just leave town typically.
Right. If somebody were to come into town and violate this ordinance, and could you fingerprint them, find out that they were some kind of a convicted felon, and then prosecute them for something else?
Now, this particular bylaw, we do not have a right of arrest on, so we'd have to file charges if we wanted to attempt to do that. So the answer to that is typically, well, not typically, the answer to that is no. Okay. We would not be able to fingerprint them in that manner.
Thank you.
Mr. Stone.
Yes, Doug Stone, 33 Birch Hill Road. And I just wondered how these license categories were selected as being dangerous.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes.
No, not dangerous, but the most common. What we did was we searched, I would estimate 25 different communities in the Commonwealth that have enacted a bylaw for this purpose. There's a very wide range of occupations that are covered. Many of them, such as cab drivers, we don't have based in community. Scrap metal dealers, that type of thing. We found that these were the three that were applicable to what we see here in our own community.
Okay, and so with light ice cream salespeople, would all of the drivers have to be fingerprinted?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, they have to go through a permitting process now. It's a law that is probably a year and a half old. They have to go through a licensing process anyway. This would just extend the review of that person to include the taking of a set of fingerprints.
Mm-hmm. I see. And, are there plans to expand these checks to other, businesses? I know that we're concerned with keeping our citizens safe, and we're, in a lot of cases, concerned with where our children will go. But, are there plans to expand this to corner stores and dance studios, karate studios, or even the parks and librarians? Are we going to be fingerprinting those people?
None of those are occupations that fall under the town's bylaws for a permitting process.
Mm-hmm. So it's only those that are being permitted then?
Correct.
That require a license?
And the whole idea, as I said, is not to rely on a photo identification. We get them from literally all over the country.
Yeah.
But a set of fingerprints will confirm who we have.
And we've had some good, as you mentioned, we've had some good checks so far that have been effective.
Correct.
And I'm just concerned that, with the small business person struggling, you've got the ice cream salesman. In particular, I'm not sure why they're really singled out, but they're a small business person that's trying to make a living, and there's, has there been consideration for those businesses being impacted? And then also, just the fact that they are going to be fingerprinted, is this going to be a false sense of security that we're going to be feeling now that these people were checked, and we're going to lower our guard now in the future.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
To answer one part of your question about the ice cream truck vendors, that was enacted by the state legislature, that they have to be permitted. There's no involvement on the part of the town. We have to follow through with that. Again, it just makes us have a more confident view of who it is.
Okay, and then my last point, or question rather, is you explained the $100 fee. I'm just familiar with one item here that, as you know, the teachers need to be fingerprinted now. And I know that in a neighboring town, that the teachers are charged $55, with other school employees charged $35, and that's paid to a vendor who provides the information to the FBI. So couldn't we do that as well? And save ourselves some money for the businessman, the small business person?
Well, first of all, unlike the teachers, as I had mentioned in the town bylaw, I am tasked with investigating the morals and integrity. That task is not assigned to me when it comes to the teachers, so I'm not involved in their process at all, and I don't believe that we're going to be.
Okay, but couldn't the fingerprinting be done through the vendor, and then you could just review that results?
I guess potentially there could be, but it just seems to add an extra layer in there right now where presently we're doing the whole process.
Well, again, I think it impacts the small business person now. He's got several drivers that now have to pay a lot of money.
Okay, Mr. Stone, you need to share the mic with others. Okay?
Okay. All right. Then I would want to propose an amendment to have that fee gone through the vendors.
Do you have something written down, Mr. Stone? Fred, there's no second?
Mr. Stone, after consulting with town council and our town administrator, we're in agreement that your proposed amendment really takes us outside the scope of what this original article is all about. I can't see people very well, so you need to stand. Please stand. Yes. You have, okay, then, was there a second? No. Then there's no motion then. Right over here.
I think I was next. That's all right, though.
Well, you weren't standing when I looked at him.
I'm sorry, I wasn't standing, but I have a bad leg and I can't stand along.
All right, let's go with it.
I'd like to ask the chief a couple of quick questions. Number one, people that come around and solicit have identification tags. The identification tags say Mass Electric or something else. When they come to your office to be registered, should they or could they be put through a process where they are tagged with a badge from the town of Northborough? One of the things that I find is that when they approached my house, the first question my wife or I asked that person is, are you registered with the town police department? And the answer is always yes. But we're taking their word. If through your process, they have to come in, like I would if I had to register a gun.
They do now.
They have to come in and they would get a badge that says Town of Northborough.
They already do.
Then the people that are coming around without that badge are not good solicitors. Is that correct?
Correct. You should call us right away.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
James Lee, 49 Lincoln Street. I know the hour's late. I will try to be as terse as possible. My first question when I read this was I didn't see a really great definition of solicitor. And I know personally at our house, we've had teenagers who are for-profit trying to sell various goods who I don't believe have gone through this process. A teenager who's, trying to get a little money to get through school would then have to pay this $100 fee?
It would depend what it is they're trying to do. If they are from a commercial magazine company and
this has been like a commercial knife company for clarification, if that helps you.
I'm sorry, a commercial
knife company.
Knife company. Yes, they would. Yes, they would.
Okay, and my second question is on completely the opposite end of the question, which was the other thing that struck me when I read this. As part of the Safe Communities Act, the fingerprints should also be sent to ICE. I mean, I would love to know if we have MS-13 gang members coming in to solicit here in town. So as the article stands, without including sending them to immigration, I can't support it without that additional safety net. And on the humorous side, I think we should extend it to realtors. But that's just a jab at you, Doug. Sorry.
To clarify, Mr. Lee, on the fingerprints, all of our fingerprints are currently sent to ICE. All of them. Any arrest, they all go.
Right over here, please.
Justine Sullivan, 22 Sunset Drive. Just a point of clarification. It seems like this is geared toward for-profit solicitation, but what about someone coming in for a political campaign or for a charitable organization? Would they have to pay $100 to be fingerprinted?
No.
Okay.
Charitable, political, those have never fallen under this.
My name's Martha Long, 39 Church. Point of clarity, because this says any person residing within town, if they're doing the charitable or they're doing the political. But our churches don't run on town residency, so if you're doing something religious-based, you're not necessarily from town. And from a political perspective, I believe, like our House representatives, the borders are not relevant to our towns. They're based on their districts.
Correct.
So I'm very concerned about the fact that somebody who's not in our town yet working for the same, House representative that I'm working for or going to my church is all of a sudden facing a $100 fee.
No, and they will not be. This is strictly at for-profit businesses from outside the community. And that's the way our soliciting system has worked for many years.
Okay.
Hearing no more discussion. Hearing no more discussion, I would like to hear a recommendation from the Board of Selectmen.
The Board of Selectmen recommends approval of this article.
Thank you. This is what you're voting on for Article 59. I move the town vote to amend the Northborough Town Code Part 2, General Legislation, by adding a new Chapter 2.2-56, fingerprint-based criminal history records, check, as set forth in the warrant. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed. Article 59 passes.
Thank you.
Article 60, reports. Are there any boards, committees, commissions, or just taxpayers that wish to come up and give a 15 to 20-minute presentation? Not hearing that, I am looking for a motion to dissolve. Motion to adjourn. No, motion to dissolve.
To dissolve.
Motion to dissolve is... All those in favor of dissolving, please raise your cards. Thank you very much.
Any opposed?
Remember the